Now that the Giller Prize is claiming that it might have to close shop unless it receives federal subsidies, there's a debate that has uh, started online. I've seen it through Facebook, perhaps elsewhere, about sort of the state of CanLit, the state of publishing in Canada, the state of literature in Canada. The three things are not absolutely equivalent. But in any case, there was a post recently by Marc Cote, the publisher of Cormorant Press, a rather detailed and interesting post about his involvement with prizes and his opinions about prizes. And like a lot of publishers, he sees the prizes as beneficial because they bring attention to books. They help sell books. And this has always been an argument that supporters of the Giller in particular have made, that the prize really boosts sales. And so it helps promote the spread of Canadian culture, and it brings commercial success to particular authors, particular publishing houses. And in the same post, Marc mentioned that right now, Canadian owned publishing houses sell books that comprise around 5% of the Canadian market. And then he continued that if one includes all the Canadian authors that are published, i.e., by international presses like Penguin Random House, the number is 25%. However, from Marc's point of view, despite the fact that these big international presses are also helping produce Canadian writing by Canadian writers, he argues that in exchange for doing that, they have benefited from a market situation in which, to use his phrase, they can dump titles by non-Canadian authors in the Canadian market. Now, a while ago, a few years ago actually, I interviewed Russell Smith, and he had comments to make about the scene in CanLit. Now, keep in mind, this is going back a few years, but I think what Russell has to say is still pertinent, and I'm going to quote from some of that interview. The question that I asked at that time was, it's common in Canadian lit circles to hear about, quote, the golden age of CanLit, usually the 60s and 70s. Yet at that time, bookstores were filled with American and British titles even more than they are now, exceptions being the big Canadian presses of the time like M&S and Stoddart. Does the Canadian literati tend to romanticize this aspect of our cultural past? Are we slowly dominating more and more on our own turf? Or will we always be bit players in our own stores? So the question that I'm asking is about this whole issue of market share. And Russell's response was, actually, the younger generation feels quite the opposite about this quote-unquote golden age of CanLit. They feel it was a time of white hegemony and sexism, and they can't wait to see this idea of a golden age destroyed. The sneering responses to Nick Mount's work of scholarship on the era demonstrates this. Most academic critics railed that there were not enough writers of color or Indigenous writers discussed in his book. But yes, we will always be bit players in our own stores because we are, quite rightly, an international and cosmopolitan people, and we are interested in literature from other larger, more sophisticated cultural centers, most notably New York and London. Of course, there are always going to be more. Of course, we are always going to be more interested in the latest Edward St. Aubin, Otessa Moshfegh, Rachel Cusk, Rachel Kushner, Elena Ferrante, Karlove Nasgard, Michel Houellebecq, and the latest, what? Sharon Butala, Sham Salvadori, Marilyn Simons, Rudy Wiebe. Those authors look like dreary obligations when placed next to those brilliant lights. and it is much better for us to read internationally. I see no benefit really for myself anyway to cultivating a nationalist reading list. The young writers and academics who dominate social media discussions of quote-unquote CanLit, I put it in question marks because I'm not sure what it refers to. It seems to refer more to a network of panel discussions than to an actual literary corpus, seems less and less interested in mainstream publishing, big presses, shelves, and indigo anyway. They are seeing their activity as part of a sort of underground activist therapeutic community that reads its own work but isn't much interested in larger distribution. This is partly practical, it's easier, and partly ideological. It reflects a rejection of commercial culture and the judgment of the non-woke, i.e. ordinary people. In response to an essay about this that I recently published in the Globe, one particularly woke and angry poet tweeted that true CanLit was neither academic discussion nor commercial publishing. It was, quote, writing in the margins, unquote, an extraordinary claim. Does one really want an entire literature to be marginal? Apparently they do. So that's the end of Russell's comment. I'll continue with this discussion, but your own comments are welcome.